Welcome to this deep dive.
Okay.
Today, we're going to take you inside a seemingly respectable nursing home called Alpine Manor.
Mm,
It's located just outside Grand Rapids, Michigan.
right.
Our source material is a true crime podcast episode called Case 260,
Okay.
The Alpine Manor Murders.
Got it.
So, we're going to uncover the chilling story of how seemingly ordinary nursing aides,
Mm,
Kathy Wood and Gwen Graham,
right.
became killers within its walls.
Okay.
So imagine a place that projects an image of comfort and care,
Right.
where families feel at ease leaving their loved ones.
Yeah.
That was Alpine Manor,
Okay.
at least on the surface.
It's fascinating how this case plays with our expectations.
Right.
You see a well-maintained building,
Hmm.
a seemingly peaceful environment,
Right.
and it's easy to assume everything is as it should be.
Yeah.
But beneath that facade, a much darker reality was unfolding.
Right. And at the heart of this darkness were Kathy Wood and Gwen Graham, two nursing aides whose paths intertwine with tragic consequences.
Yeah.
So initially, Kathy seemed to genuinely care for the residents.
Okay.
Who even volunteered as a nursing assistant in high school.
Mm,
But something shifted.
right.
Maybe it was the stress of the job.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the toxic environment at Alpine Manor.
Mm-hmm.
But she became withdrawn,
Okay.
more focused on her relationships at work.
Right.
And that's when she met Gwen.
Gwen's a more complex figure.
Yeah.
The podcast episode delves into her troubled past,
Right.
marked by abuse and self-harm.
Mm-hmm.
There's this sense that she was drawn to darkness,
Yeah.
almost like she was seeking it out.
Yeah.
And in Kathy, she found someone who could facilitate that descent.
It's a classic recipe for disaster, isn't it?
Yeah,
Two individuals, each with their own baggage, finding a twisted kind of solace in each other's darkness.
right.
And together, their behavior escalated from what seemed like harmless pranks to something far more sinister.
Those early pranks are actually a crucial part of the story. They created a culture of fear
Right.
and desensitized Kathy and Gwen to the suffering they were inflicting.
Yeah.
Turning residents' beds around,
Mm-hmm.
moving them to different rooms.
Right.
It started subtly,
Okay.
but quickly escalated.
Yeah.
There's one incident where Gwen hid under a resident's bed,
Oh, wow.
terrifying
Yeah.
another staff member.
Imagine being that resident.
Yeah.
You're in a place that's supposed to be safe,
Right.
a haven.
Right.
And suddenly you're confronted with this terrifying, inexplicable situation.
Yeah.
It's a complete violation of trust.
And tragically, those weren't the only warning signs.
Right.
Staff members,
Mm-hmm.
like Tish Prescott,
Okay.
voiced concerns about Kathy and Gwen's behavior,
Right.
but their warnings were ignored.
Wow.
It's almost as if the system itself was complicit,
Yeah.
turning a blind eye to the danger that was brewing.
And then there was that horrifying prank call they made to Nancy Hahn, a resident's daughter,
Yeah.
falsely telling her that her mother was dying.
Mm-hmm.
That incident to me really highlights their utter disregard for the residents' well-being.
Right.
They were playing with people's lives like it was some sick game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a lapse in judgment.
Right.
It was a deliberate act of cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
They seemed to derive pleasure from the fear and distress they caused.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the victims themselves.
Okay.
Marguerite Chambers,
Mhm.
Myrtle Luce,
Right.
May Mason,
Okay.
Belle Burkhardt,
Yeah.
and Edith Cook.
Right.
You see,
Yeah.
these weren't just names on a police report.
Right.
Marguerite, Myrtle,
Right.
May, Belle,
Yeah.
Edith.
Yeah.
They were all someone's mother,
Right.
grandmother,
Mhm.
perhaps a friend.
Yeah.
And their conditions,
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, limited mobility,
Right.
made them easy targets for Kathy and Gwen,
Right.
who clearly believed they could exploit the system's blind spots.
It's heartbreaking to think about their vulnerability, especially in a place where they should have felt safe.
Yeah.
And the method they use, suffocation by washcloth,
Mm-hmm.
it just adds another layer of horror to this whole story.
Yeah.
It wasn't a quick or impulsive act. It was
Right.
calculated
Yeah.
and chillingly intimate.
The method speaks volumes about their mindset.
Right.
They chose a method that required close proximity to the victims,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of control,
Yeah.
and a chilling disregard for the sanctity of human life.
Right.
It's a detail that really gets under your skin, isn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It's almost too disturbing to contemplate.
Right.
And then there was that whole murder acronym plan they
Ah.
devised,
Oh.
using the victim's initials,
Right.
how it ultimately failed.
Mm-hmm.
It showcases their premeditated and callous approach to their crimes. They weren't
Mhm.
just reacting to difficult situations,
Right.
they were actively seeking out opportunities to inflict harm.
And they specifically targeted residents who were nonverbal, who
Right.
had dementia,
Right.
Yeah.
assuming their crimes would go unnoticed.
Wow.
They preyed on those who were least likely to be believed,
Right.
those whose voices were already silenced by their conditions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a truly chilling aspect of this case.
It makes you question everything you think you know about trust,
It does.
compassion, and the sanctity of life. How
Yeah.
could anyone,
Yeah.
let alone those entrusted with care,
Right.
commit such heinous acts?
Yeah.
It's a question that haunts this case.
And it's a question that would take over a year to even begin to be answered.
Wow.
The truth began to unravel when Kathy Wood's ex-husband,
Mm-hmm.
Ken,
Okay.
found himself in an unimaginable position.
Right.
He had to make a choice.
Yeah.
Protect the woman he once loved
Mm-hmm.
or expose a horrific truth.
Can you imagine the turmoil he must have gone through?
Oh,
The
absolutely.
weight of knowing such a dark secret?
Right.
The internal battle between loyalty and justice?
It must have been agonizing.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he chose to report Kathy's confession to the police,
Wow.
setting in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved.
Right.
And as the investigation unfolds,
Mm-hmm.
we see these two women, once united in their darkness,
Right.
now pitted against each other.
Right. Kathy chooses to cooperate with the police,
Mm-hmm.
providing gruesome details about the murders.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Gwen denies everything,
Right.
even taking a polygraph test that yielded inconclusive results.
Oh, wow.
So it becomes a battle of credibility.
Yeah, for sure.
Whose word will the investigators
Right.
and ultimately the jury believe?
The investigators faced an uphill battle.
Yeah.
They needed more than just confessions. They
Yeah.
needed concrete evidence to build a solid case.
Right.
It was a race against time,
Yeah.
a desperate search for truth amidst a web of lies, manipulation,
Yeah.
and unimaginable cruelty.
And that's where the exhumations come in, right? Marguerite Chambers and Edith Cook, their bodies disturbed in a desperate attempt to uncover the truth.
Imagine the family's anguish,
I know.
having to exhume their loved ones' bodies in a desperate search for answers.
Right.
It's a testament to how deeply this case shook the community and how determined the authorities were to uncover the truth.
So what happened next?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated.
Okay.
The examination of the bodies was challenging due to decomposition,
Right.
especially in Marguerite's case.
Mm-hmm.
The medical examiner was looking for any sign of suffocation,
Right.
but those initial findings were inconclusive.
Oh, no.
It seemed like they had hit a dead end.
So did the case fall apart?
Not quite.
Okay.
Despite the lack of clear physical evidence of suffocation,
Mm-hmm.
the pathologist was certain that neither woman had died of a heart attack,
Right.
as their original death certificate stated.
Right.
There was something deeply suspicious about their deaths,
Yeah.
even if the exact cause couldn't be pinpointed with certainty.
So there was still hope.
Yes,
Okay.
a glimmer of justice for the victims.
And that glimmer came from a courageous decision made by the medical examiner.
It did.
Okay.
Based on the suspicious circumstances
Mm.
and the evidence provided by Kathy,
Right.
he changed the official cause of death for both Marguerite and Edith to homicide.
Wow.
Yeah,
That must have been a monumental moment in the case.
it was.
Yeah.
It gave the prosecution the legal basis they needed to pursue murder charges.
Right.
But a significant challenge still loomed,
Okay.
proving Gwen's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt,
Right.
especially with the lack of definitive physical evidence.
That's where Kathy's testimony became crucial, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The prosecution needed her to paint a convincing picture of Gwen as the killer,
Right.
to corroborate the circumstantial evidence
Mm-hmm.
and persuade the jury that Gwen was responsible for these horrific crimes.
And what about Gwen?
Well,
Yeah.
what was her defense?
Right.
Did she maintain her innocence?
Yeah.
Yes. Vehemently.
Wow.
Her defense team argued that Kathy was a liar,
Right.
a scorned woman seeking revenge. They claimed that she had fabricated the entire story to punish Gwen for leaving her.
Oh,
It became a classic he said, she said scenario,
yeah.
but with the lives of 5 vulnerable individuals hanging in the balance.
It must have been incredibly tense.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The jury had to decipher truth from lies
Right.
to determine who was the manipulator
Right.
and who was the victim.
It was a high-stakes game of credibility.
It was
Right.
played out on the public stage.
Right.
And as the trial began in September 1989,
Okay.
the eyes of the nation turned to that courtroom in Grand Rapids, Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to see how justice would be served.
So the stage was set for a dramatic showdown.
Well,
The prosecution had to convince the jury that Gwen was the driving force behind these murders,
Right.
while the defense tried to paint Kathy as a bitter ex-lover out for revenge. It's like something out of a courtroom drama,
right.
except the stakes were incredibly real.
And remember, this wasn't just about determining guilt or innocence.
Right.
It was about holding someone accountable for the deaths of 5 vulnerable individuals.
Mm-hmm.
The weight of those lives hung heavy in the air,
Right.
both for the families of the victims
Yeah.
and for the community at large.
The podcast episode mentions how Kathy and Gwen would actually joke about the murders.
Right.
It makes it even harder to grasp the reality of what happened.
Yeah.
How could anyone treat such horrific acts so casually?
That's one of the most unsettling aspects of this case.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that evil can lurk beneath the surface of normalcy,
Right.
that even those who appear ordinary can harbor a capacity for unimaginable cruelty.
Okay, so let's get into the trial itself.
Okay.
What were the key moments?
Well, the turning points that ultimately led to the jury's verdict, well, Kathy took the stand
Okay.
and delivered a detailed account of the murders, describing how she acted as a lookout
Right.
while Gwen suffocated the victims.
Okay.
She presented herself as a reluctant participant,
Yeah.
someone who was terrified of Gwen,
Mhm.
but also manipulated by her.
But the defense challenged her credibility, right?
Exactly.
They pointed to her inconsistent statements
Right.
and suggested she was motivated by revenge.
Exactly. They tried to poke holes in her story
Right.
to raise doubts in the minds of the jurors.
Yeah.
It became a battle of perceptions,
Mm-hmm.
with each side trying to control the narrative.
It seems like a classic tactic, trying to discredit the witness and create reasonable doubt.
Right.
But was there anyone else who could corroborate Kathy's claims? Yeah.
Did anyone else know about the murders? Yes. And this is where the case takes another dramatic turn.
Okay.
The prosecution called Gwen's ex-girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
Heather,
Hmm.
to the stand.
Wow, that must have been intense.
Yeah.
What did Heather have to say?
Heather testified that Gwen had confessed the murders to her
Wow.
after the police first visited their trailer in Texas.
Okay.
She described how Gwen had been adamant that she was telling the truth,
Right.
even shaking her to emphasize the point.
So even Gwen's own girlfriend believed she was capable of these murders.
Right.
That's pretty damning.
It was a powerful moment in the trial.
Yeah.
And as if the tension wasn't already high enough,
Right.
as Heather was leaving the witness stand,
Uh-huh.
Gwen shouted out, "I still love you, Heather."
That courtroom outburst.
Yeah,
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it?
it is.
A twisted declaration of love amidst such horrific circumstances.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the complexities of their relationship
Yeah.
and the psychological forces at play.
It's a detail that sticks with you long after you've heard the story.
It does.
It speaks to the tangled web of emotions,
Yeah.
motivations,
Mhm.
and perhaps even delusions that fueled these crimes.
So after all the testimony,
Yeah.
the drama, the conflicting accounts, what did the jury decide?
After 6 hours of deliberation,
Okay.
the jury found Gwen Graham guilty on all counts.
Wow.
5 counts of first-degree murder
Right.
and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder.
Mm-hmm.
She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Life in prison.
Yeah.
It's a sentence that reflects the gravity of her crimes.
Right.
The irreversible loss of 5 lives.
Right.
What about Kathy?
What
Yeah.
was her fate? Remember, Kathy had accepted a plea deal
Right.
in exchange for her testimony against Gwen.
Okay.
She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder
Mm-hmm.
and conspiracy to commit murder.
So she received a lighter sentence?
Yes, she was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison
Okay.
with the possibility of parole after 16 years.
So a stark contrast to Gwen's sentence.
Yeah.
And it reflects the complexities of her role in these murders.
It does.
It raises some uncomfortable questions, doesn't it?
It does.
Did Kathy's plea deal, where she essentially traded information for a reduced sentence,
Right.
diminish the value of the victims' lives in the eyes of the law?
That's a valid question.
Yeah.
And one that many people grappled with in the aftermath of the trial.
Yeah.
Some felt that Kathy got off too easy,
Right.
that her cooperation shouldn't have outweighed the severity of her crimes.
Right.
It sparked a debate about the ethics of plea deals
Mm-hmm.
and whether they truly serve justice.
And the public reaction to the case was quite divided, wasn't it?
It was.
The podcast episode mentioned that some people felt the crimes were less severe because the victims were elderly,
Right.
and many were suffering from dementia or were nonverbal.
That's a disturbingly common reaction to crimes against the elderly,
Yeah.
and it reflects a deeply ingrained societal bias.
Right.
It's as if their vulnerability, their
Mhm.
dependence on others,
Yeah.
somehow makes their lives less valuable.
It's like people are saying, well, they were old and sick anyway, so it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
Which is just horrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
And this case forces us to confront those uncomfortable truths
Mm-hmm.
about how we as a society value and protect the most vulnerable among us.
Right.
Are we doing enough?
Yeah.
Are we listening to their voices?
Yeah.
Are we ensuring their safety and respecting their right to a life free from fear and violence?
These are questions that everyone should be asking.
They are.
Not just in the context of this case, but in our daily lives.
Exactly.
How do we create a society that values all lives,
Right.
regardless of age,
Yeah.
ability, or circumstance?
It's a challenge,
It is.
but it's a challenge we must embrace.
Right.
We need to move beyond simply reacting to tragedies
Right.
and instead proactively work to create a world where every individual feels safe,
Yeah.
valued, and respected.
And that brings us to the aftermath of the trial.
Okay.
Justice was served,
Right.
at least in the legal sense.
Mhm.
But what about the families of the victims? What about the community that was shaken to its core by these events?
For the families, the guilty verdicts brought a sense of closure,
Okay.
but they couldn't erase the pain of their loss.
Right.
They were left to grapple with the knowledge that their loved ones had been brutally murdered
Mm-hmm.
in a place that was supposed to care for them.
Yeah.
It was a betrayal of trust on a profound level.
It's hard to imagine the anger,
It is?
the grief,
Yeah.
the sense of helplessness they must have felt.
Right.
And to make matters worse, the podcast mentions that some families weren't even notified by Alpine Manor
Right.
that their loved ones were potential victims.
I know.
They had to find out through the media.
That's a shocking detail.
It is.
And it speaks to a culture of secrecy
Right.
and a lack of accountability within the institution itself.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they were more concerned with protecting their reputation
Right.
than with acknowledging the harm that had been done.
It's like they were trying to sweep the whole thing under the rug to pretend it never happened.
Yeah.
And that just adds another layer of trauma for the families who are already struggling to cope with the loss of their loved ones.
It's a classic example of institutional betrayal,
Right.
where those in power prioritize self-preservation over the well-being of those they are supposed to serve.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need for greater transparency and accountability in caregiving settings.
But beyond the legal and institutional ramifications, this case also raises profound ethical and philosophical questions
Right.
about the nature of good and evil,
Yeah.
about the choices we make,
Yeah.
about the responsibility we have to protect the vulnerable.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the procedural details.
Right.
But it's important to remember that this case is ultimately about people,
Mm-hmm.
about lives that were tragically cut short,
Right.
about a community that was forever changed by these events.
Yeah.
It's a story that stays with you long after you've heard it,
It does.
a story that compels you to ask difficult questions and to search for answers that may not be easy to find.
And even though Kathy and Gwen were convicted,
Right.
there are still so many unanswered questions.
There are.
How many other victims were there?
Right.
What was the true extent of Kathy's involvement?
Yeah.
And perhaps most importantly,
Mm.
how can we prevent such tragedies from happening again?
Those are the questions that haunt this case.
Yeah.
The questions that keep us up at night.
Right.
They challenge us to look beyond the surface,
Mm.
to examine the systemic issues that contributed to these horrors,
Right.
and to work towards creating a world where such atrocities are unthinkable.
It's a daunting task,
It is.
but one that we can't afford to ignore.
Right.
We owe it to the victims,
Yeah.
to their families, and to
Mhm.
ourselves to learn from the past
Right.
and to strive for a future where every life is cherished and protected.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
This case isn't just a true crime story.
Right.
It's a call to action, a reminder that we all have a role to play in safeguarding the vulnerable
Right.
and ensuring that justice prevails.
So what can our listeners do?
Well, what concrete steps can we take to make a difference?
Yeah.
We can start by being more aware of the realities of elder abuse.
Okay.
We can educate ourselves about the signs,
Right.
the risk factors,
Mm-hmm.
and the resources available to help.
Right.
We can talk to our loved ones about their experiences in caregiving settings
Yeah.
and be vigilant for any red flags.
And what about advocating for change at a policy level?
Absolutely.
I mean, the episode highlighted some pretty glaring systemic issues,
It did.
like understaffing,
Right.
lack of oversight,
Yeah.
and a general disregard for the well-being of residents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to demand better from our elected officials,
Right.
from the institutions that are entrusted with the care of our most vulnerable citizens.
Mm-hmm.
We need to push for policies that prioritize resident safety,
Right.
that ensure adequate staffing levels,
Mm-hmm.
that hold caregivers accountable for their actions,
Right.
and that create a culture of transparency and respect within these facilities.
It's about shifting our priorities as a society.
It is.
Recognizing that the care and well-being of our elderly population is a reflection of our values,
Right.
our humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to move beyond simply warehousing the elderly
Right.
and instead embrace a model of care that honors their dignity,
Mm-hmm.
their individuality,
Yeah.
and their right to live out their days in peace and security.
And that brings us to a point that wasn't explicitly addressed in the podcast episode, but is
Okay.
worth exploring.
Right.
Given the systemic issues that contributed to the Alpine Manor tragedies,
Mm-hmm.
what specific policy changes or initiatives would you propose?
To better safeguard the elderly and ensure accountability in caregiving settings. That's an excellent question,
Yeah,
and one that deserves careful consideration.
right.
It's not about quick fixes or simplistic solutions.
Right.
It's about a fundamental shift in how we approach elder care.
So where do we start?
Well, what are some concrete steps we can take?
Yeah.
Well, for starters, we need to address the chronic understaffing
Right.
and overworking of nurses in nursing homes.
Yeah,
This isn't just about numbers.
right.
It's about creating a work environment where caregivers feel valued,
Mm-hmm.
supported,
Yeah.
and empowered to provide the best possible care.
So better pay,
Yeah,
better training,
right.
better working conditions overall.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we also need to strengthen oversight and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
That means more rigorous inspections,
Right.
stricter enforcement of regulations,
Right.
and a system for reporting and investigating abuse.
Yeah.
That is truly effective.
Okay.
We need to create a culture where residents feel safe speaking up,
Yeah.
where their concerns are taken seriously,
Mm-hmm.
and where perpetrators are held accountable for their actions.
It's about empowering residents,
Yeah,
giving them a voice, and ensuring that they are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve.
exactly.
Okay.
And it's also about recognizing that families play a crucial role in advocating for their loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
We need to provide families with the information and resources they need
Right.
to navigate the complexities of the caregiving system,
Right. Yeah.
to identify red flags,
Yeah.
and to effectively advocate for their loved one's well-being.
It's about creating a collaborative approach to care
It is.
where families,
Yeah.
caregivers,
Yeah.
institutions work together to ensure the best possible outcomes for residents.
It's a vision worth striving for,
It is.
a vision that honors the inherent value of every human life,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of age or circumstance.
Powerful words.
Yeah.
And a powerful reminder that even in the face of such darkness,
Right.
there is hope.
There is.
There is a path forward, a way to create a world where tragedies like those at Alpine Manor are less likely to occur.
And it's a path we must forge together
Right.
with compassion, determination,
Mm-hmm.
and a shared commitment to protecting the most vulnerable among us.
You know, as we've been discussing these policy changes, it strikes me that the Alpine Manor case wasn't just about two individuals who went rogue.
Right.
It exposed a system that was,
Yes.
in many ways, broken.
Yeah, for sure.
A system that failed to protect those who needed it most.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Kathy and Gwen's actions were horrific,
Right.
but they were able to exploit vulnerabilities within the system itself.
Yeah.
There were cracks in the foundation,
Mhm.
warning signs that were ignored,
Right.
and a culture that seemed to prioritize efficiency over compassion.
The episode really highlighted the power dynamics at play within the nursing home.
It did.
Staff members who reported concerns about Kathy and Gwen were dismissed.
Right.
It's almost as if management was more worried about bad publicity or the
Yes.
inconvenience of finding replacements
Mm-hmm.
than about the safety of the residents.
That's a classic example of how institutional self-preservation can trump individual well-being.
Yeah.
It's a chilling reminder that even in places designed for care,
Right.
power can be misused and the vulnerable can be silenced.
And it makes you wonder
Yeah,
how many other potential cases of abuse are going unreported,
right.
swept under the rug to protect reputations and maintain the status quo.
It's a disturbing thought,
It is.
and it underscores the need for whistleblowing protections for those who dare to speak out against wrongdoing.
Right.
We need to create a culture where speaking truth to power is not only encouraged, but also protected.
Right.
It's essential for ensuring accountability and preventing future tragedies.
It's about shifting the balance of power,
It is.
giving a voice to those who are often voiceless.
Right.
But it's not just about calling out bad actors.
Right.
It's about creating a more humane and compassionate approach to elder care as a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to move away from treating nursing homes as warehouses for the unwanted, and instead embrace a model that values the dignity and individuality of each resident.
It's about seeing the person, not just the patient.
Right.
Recognizing that each individual has a story, a
Yeah.
history,
Yeah.
a set of needs that go beyond basic medical care.
It requires a shift from a purely medical model of care
Right.
to one that prioritizes holistic well-being,
Right.
a model that addresses not just physical needs,
Yeah.
but also emotional, social, and spiritual needs.
And that requires adequate funding and resources.
It does.
As we've discussed, understaffing and overwork are major contributors to burnout
Right.
and a decline in the quality of care.
Yeah.
It creates an environment where mistakes are more likely to happen
Mm-hmm.
and where compassion fatigue can set in.
Exactly.
Right.
We need to invest in our caregiving workforce, providing them with the training, support, and compensation they deserve. It's not just about filling beds.
Right.
It's about fostering a culture of care where caregivers feel valued and empowered to do their best work.
And it's important to remember that not all nursing homes are bad.
Oh, absolutely.
There are dedicated and compassionate caregivers out there who are truly committed to their residents' well-being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But cases like the Alpine Manor murders serve as a stark reminder
Yeah.
that the potential for abuse exists.
Right.
And we need to be vigilant.
Right.
We need to have systems in place that protect the vulnerable, that hold perpetrators accountable,
Right.
and that promote a culture of care that is truly centered on the well-being of each individual.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this complex and disturbing case,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
What can we do
Yeah.
individually and collectively
Right.
to make a difference? First and foremost, we need to acknowledge the problem.
Okay.
Elder abuse is a reality,
Right.
and it's often hidden.
Right.
It's happening in our communities,
Yeah.
maybe even in our own families.
Yeah.
We need to be aware of the signs, the risk factors,
And right.
and the resources available to help.
And we need to speak up.
Yeah.
If we see something that doesn't seem right,
Yeah,
we need to report it.
absolutely.
Silence is complicity.
It is.
We can also support organizations that advocate for the rights of the elderly
Yeah,
and those with disabilities.
right.
We can volunteer our time at nursing homes, visit our loved ones who are in care facilities,
Yeah,
and be a voice for those who are often voiceless.
right.
And we can challenge ageist attitudes and stereotypes whenever we encounter them.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing the inherent value of every human life,
It is.
regardless of age or ability.
We need to create a society where aging is seen not as a decline,
Right.
but as a continuation of life's journey,
Yeah.
where wisdom is valued
Mm-hmm.
and where the elderly are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve.
It's a vision worth fighting for.
It is.
A vision that honors the interconnectedness of all life and recognizes that the well-being of our elders is a reflection of our own humanity. And so we leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
What will you do today, tomorrow,
Yeah.
and in the days to come
Right.
to contribute to a world where tragedies like those at Alpine Manor are less likely to occur?
Yeah.
The choice is yours,
It is.
but the responsibility is ours.